comic books and superheroes with some nerdy peeps, writers, cartoonists, and so much more. So stick around and have some fun with the lovely and adorable Evil Web.
Ibrahim Moustafa is an Eisner Award-nominated writer and artist from Portland, Oregon. His work has been published by DC Entertainment, Marvel Comics, Image Comics, Dynamite Entertainment, Dark Horse, and Boom, among others. Published by premier French publisher Humanoids, his eagerly anticipated graphic novel Count is on sale in bookstores now. Count follows the adventures of Redxan Samud, framed for treason and wrongfully imprisoned at the hands of a jealous and corrupt magistrate. Samud escapes his impossible prison with only one thing on his mind: revenge. This book is breathtaking. How are you, Ibrahim?
I am well, thank you. How are you doing?
I am loving life. So, the way we like to start the show generally is by asking you where your creative journey with comics begins. Where are you from? Where did that spark happen?
I'm from the Pacific Northwest, so the upper left corner of the U.S. I was born in Seattle, Washington, and I was raised in the Portland metro area. So I've been in and around Portland for the majority of my life.
Nice. What's your first memory of the comic book medium?
My first memory would be the first two comics I ever received. I was probably 4 years old, and I was given a copy of John Byrne's Man of Steel #2 that came with an audio cassette that had voice actors and sound effects, and that was a big part of how I learned to read. It was just going through that single comic over and over again and listening to the tape. And the other one I was given at the same time was, I believe it was Detective Comics #683, which was I want to say a Marv Wolfman and Jim Aparo, Dick Giordano issue of Detective. And of course, back then I didn't know that there were subsequent issues in the story. So to me, it was just, this is the issue. This is, this is this is the whole book. And then I was also very much into the Christopher Reeve Superman movies as a little kid. So that was pretty much my universe. And then I got into the Ninja Turtles as I got a little bit older, and those were coming around. And then the X-Men cartoon, when I was, 7 or 8 years old, came on, and I was heavily into that. So, and at the time too, I was also getting X-Men comics from the grocery store here or there. So that was my initial sort of interaction with comics. And then I fell out of it for a long time, just as you do. And it wasn't until the tail end of high school and right after high school that I got back into them, because Smallville came on the air, and being such a Superman fan, I was like, oh, let me watch this new Superman show. And then somebody gifted me a book that was called The Complete History of Superman. And it was a hardcover, and on the dust jacket, it had old Siegel and Schuster era Superman images. And then underneath the dust jacket, it had Alex Ross reinterpretations of those same drawings. And I was absolutely floored by it, because I had no idea that you could do that with superheroes and make them look like real people. And so, in art. And so that sent me on a journey down the rabbit hole of figuring out who this artist was, what medium they were using. And then from there, I picked up Kingdom Come and Superman Birthright, which were both written by Mark Waid, and that put me onto his work. And then I started to just kind of go further and further down and try to find books that were the best drawings of Superman I could find, because I was so into the art aspect of it. And then eventually, the appreciation for the writing came about as well. And I was, before I knew it, I had a pull box.
That's awesome. So you've worked on some really just amazing, definitive comics over the years. You've worked on High Crimes, James Bond Origins, Savage Things, Dr. Fate, Ringside. You've worked on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for IDW. What was the first, or rather, what was on your mind when you got that first big gig professionally in the comic book industry?
Well, it was pretty gradual. I did a book that came out through IDW, was my first real actual paid project, but it was a project there where the writer and the letterer had conceived the idea and written it, and I drew the second volume of it, and they paid me out of pocket, and it was a pretty low page rate. It wasn't anything official, but it was going to come out through IDW, and that was what I was concerned with, because I was finally going to get a book that was out from a real publisher, and that holds a lot of cachet as you're trying to get further work. But at the time I was working a day job and going to school, so it was not something I ever really got to revel in, because it wasn't necessarily reveling territory yet. And then I met Chris Sabella, who I did High Crimes with through a mutual friend, and that was really a labor of love, and it was some of the most fun I've had making comics, because he and I were just in it together, and it was us from birth to earth for the most part, and it was really just such an organic process for the two of us, and we became very good friends. And when we started, it came out digitally through a publisher called Monkey Brain, which Chris Robertson and Allison Baker headed up. And so it was published on Comixology initially, and then eventually we got a deal to put out a hardcover through Dark Horse. But during that time when we were making it, it was coming out digitally, so we were getting responses to it in real time, and thankfully people were enjoying it critically, and it was helping to secure a foothold for the two of us in the industry. So I think that, even though it wasn't a paid thing, he and I were just doing it out of our own pockets, as a labor of love. I think that was the first time where I felt like I was really in it and doing it. And it was a pretty fantastic feeling, because, you feel like you're kind of part of this club of people who are all just giving it their all. And, that's not something you really get to recapture as you become more jaded by the the job and the industry and whatnot. So I think that would have to be the answer to that one.
So I got the most incredible email yesterday from somebody we both know. Her name is Hannah. Hannah is the best in the universe. She is absolutely amazing. And she sent me this email that had the trailer for your new book in it. And I watched it, and I just said to myself, my God, this is one of the most ambitious things I think I've ever seen. I have to talk to this guy. So I reached out right away. And I was wondering if you could tell me about this project, and just what was the genesis of it? I mean, this is big. This is a huge project.
Yeah, well, thank you first of all, and big shout out to Hannah. She's wonderful, and really a credit to her profession for sure. Yeah, the trailer I actually made myself. So the fact that it got a reaction from you like that was pretty great. So thank you for relaying that to me. I'm a big fan of stories that deal with revenge and justice and comeuppance, and the bad guy getting theirs. And so I was thinking about, I wanted to start making my own stuff from a writer artist standpoint. I had done another digital first book called Jaeger that I wrote and drew, that I was lucky enough to get nominated for an Eisner for. So that helped kind of light the fire under me that, hey, you know what, I feel like I can do this. Because at the time, previously I had really bought into the binary of there's a writer and then there's an artist. Because, one of the I think major failings of this industry from a sort of collective standpoint is the way that we tend to undervalue the art aspect of comics and really put it all a lot of the credit toward the writers. Now, this is no slight against writers. They're fantastic, and comics are collaborative as a medium, and it's a wonderful thing to do. But I think there's a part of you that reads a review where the writer gets credit for something you did, and you kind of go, all right, fine, I'll do it myself. So I wanted to continue writing for myself, and also because I think that creatively it's more fulfilling for me. I mean, that's the main thing, is that I just get the most out of that part of the process when I'm the full storyteller as much as possible. I think it allows me to play to my own strengths, and I ask myself to draw things that I'm happy with or that might challenge me, that somebody else, doesn't necessarily have the inclination to do. And so I wanted to make something that I was going to have fun with and get to do some real world building with. And I was thinking about what I could do within that revenge genre, and the Count of Monte Cristo is just like it's a classic, and it's sort of the granddaddy of all revenge stories in a lot of ways. But it's also of its time, in the sense that it was written in the 1800s, and it takes place then. And we've seen, it's been adapted several times in various movies, and even modern stuff will be inspired by it. And you may not know that they're basically doing a riff on the Count of Monte Cristo, but they are, right? So I thought, well, what if it was in a really cool setting where floating islands and sword fights, and because the original novel is not very adventurous. I think a lot of people remember Alexandre Dumas for the Three Musketeers, which is the definition of swashbuckling, right? But the Count of Monte Cristo is not that at all. It's much more of a protracted soap operatic drama. And so I really wanted to take the seeds of it. A young man is wrongfully imprisoned for life and befriends another prisoner, and together they plot an escape, and the other prisoner knows the whereabouts of a vast treasure. And so the main character escapes and uses that treasure to seek his revenge. But I wanted to do something different beyond that. And so a lot of it came to be with the ideas of the world building that I wanted to do. And, I put robots in it because I love robots. And I found a way to weave that into being more than just a little thing that, oh, hey, this is cool, there's robots in it. Like, it's a big part of the story. And, I wanted there to be sword fights and action and cool vehicles and things like that. So it really all just kind of floated around in my head until I started putting it into a pretty solid pitch PDF that I assembled, that was, it had character designs and synopses of who they were and a breakdown of the broad strokes of the story, and then from there it was just about finding a home for it. So,
And the book is called Count, and it's being published by Humanoids.
correct, yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah, and Humanoids really is just the perfect home for it, because they're a powerhouse in terms of cutting edge sci-fi and comics with a lot of rich world building and things like that. And that was something I really wanted to do with this book, was a lot of visual world building. And it's also, Humanoids is by origin a French publisher, and this book is by origin a French story. And so it was kind of serendipitous that they ended up approaching me about another project, and scheduling didn't work out, but I said, hey, I do have this other thing I'd like to pitch. And so that's how it all came to be.
So the world in this book is just crazy. It's space, it's floating things, it's fast floating cars. There's monsters and robots and kissing and just all of it. It's perfect. I mean, just it looks perfect. What makes for good world building? How do you come up with a world that people really want to invest in?
For me, I think it's what I needed to do was ask myself why, right? So I had these visuals that I wanted to do because they were fun to draw, or I thought they would be. And, I was looking forward to doing these different designs and things. But I wanted to give a sort of grounded functionality to it all. So that I asked myself, why? Why do these islands float? Why do these cars look like this? Why do the ships look like they do? And that is how I ended up coming up with a lot of it. For example, I think it really started with the floating islands because, and those are kind of a trope in a lot of fiction, but who cares? Like, they look cool, right? And so, but I thought, nobody ever talks about why they float. So, and I don't come out and say it in this book, but it's certainly, the information is there. Once you get through the book, it's all clear, I think. But the answer I came up for myself was that there is a reverse polarity at work in this world where, you have certain natural elements within the earth that are magnetic in nature, whether through different ores and whatnot, and metals found inside the soil and everything, and the bedrock and all that, and their polarity and reverse polarity in relation to each other cause that distance. So it's like when you put two magnets together, with the opposite sides facing each other, and you feel that push from them. That's essentially what's happening in this world. And then that led me to the thought of what the rest of their technology would do, or how it would function if this is the world that they lived in. And the answer to that for me was that they were able to harness that, and because of that, they didn't need things like a combustion engine, which is what our world's entire industrial revolution was based on, right? So they don't have to harness these little explosions to make things go in the way that we do. So their vehicles use this reverse polarity, and their structures use it as well, and their ships and whatnot. And then so because they're not built around these little engines that have little explosions happening all the time, then I said, okay, well, what do these things look like if they never had cars as a natural, evolution of like a horse and buggy? Then what did their horse and buggy turn into? And so, some of the vehicles are based around what a carriage looks like without a horse, and their bike things that they ride on are more based on a horse than a bicycle, like our motorcycles are. And their ships look like whales because that's sort of a natural progression in my mind to, well, these large things that move through the water, if you're going to make a large thing that moves above the water, it might echo that natural occurring animal. So, I definitely did a lot of stuff and took a lot of liberties, but I didn't make the world too different in terms of, the general physics are still the same, and there's no, I didn't make different animals or beasts that don't exist here. In fact, there are no animals in the book, frankly. But then we have the robots, right? The androids, and what do those look like if their principles are based around the same kind of technology and not steampunk or computers and that sort of thing. So that for me was what the world building meant, was asking myself those kinds of questions and then answering them in the best way that I could while still making things look cool.
Do you work in digital or pen and paper when you draw?
I'm still on paper. I mean, I do a little bit of digital because I do my layouts digitally. So I'll essentially plan out the pages. I'll draw a rough draft of them on the computer and send those to my editor for notes. And then from there, once we have those locked in, I'll print them out onto the paper that I used to draw on in like a faint, low opacity versions of cyan and magenta, which are colors that don't necessarily reproduce when you scan them, and they're easily edited out once you have an inked page on top of it. So that gives me the underlying structure, and then everything after the layouts is all traditional. I did work digitally for about a year. I did Mother Panic, Gotham AD, and then James Bond Origin. I did 6 issues of each of the, well, 5 of Mother Panic, 6 of James Bond. I did all digitally because I wanted to try my hand at it and speed up a bit and see how much time it would save me. And it was a really cool experience, and people are making some really great stuff that way. For me, ultimately, it wasn't what I loved about drawing. I like a lot of the things that are just a function of the tactile traditional form of it. And I also didn't feel like I ever got to a point where I was so good at the traditional version that I could just switch it up like that. So I wanted to kind of go back to the traditional route and keep trying to challenge myself as far as that goes.
Is there a huge difference, like in planning and orchestration, between delivering your comic on paper and delivering it digitally? Are there different things you have to take into account?
Yes, I mean, certainly with digital, you have a lot more freedom in terms of making mistakes because you can just click those away in a few different ways. You can also, with digital, it saves you from having to draw the same thing over and over again because you can just copy and paste it, which is great. And I did a lot of that while I was working digitally, because why would I draw this room again? Oh, I mean, obviously you change panels and angles and stuff, but there are certain things that you can reuse. And so for me, it really helped me speed up. And I was doing it at a time where I had a lot more work than I had time to do. And so something had to give, and it was a really great happy medium for that. So on paper, you tend to have to commit a little bit more. And yeah, I mean, other than that, it is a pretty one-to-one thing in terms of, you're still sitting down and drawing the whole thing. And, I think digital just tends to be more expedient because you don't have to take the time to scan and clean up your pages when there's little flecks of dust on the scanning bed and things like that. You can just finish it, flatten all the layers to compress the image, and then send it off. But yeah, even though it takes longer to do it traditionally, I just enjoy it so much more that it's worth that extra little bit of time in the end for me.
It's really interesting. When you're writing and drawing the whole thing yourself, just producing the entire book, are there any unique challenges to just doing the whole thing yourself?
That's a good question. I mean, I think ultimately, whether you're a writer or an artist, the story should always be the focus. And I think being in at the helm of both helps in that way, because when you're just drawing it, there's a lot more that you have to wade through to make to realize the page, because a lot of writers don't necessarily think visually, right? So they might write a scene where XYZ happens inside this house or inside this room, but when you're actually sitting down and drawing that room, the sequence of events that the writer has written doesn't make sense in a logistic way with how a home is laid out or how this specific home is laid out, for example. So then you got to figure out, okay, well, how do I stage this in a way that all of this stuff makes sense? And also, they've got character A speaking first in panel 1, and then character B speaks first in panel 2. So I have to think about the juxtaposition of these characters to each other in this environment and the speaking order that it goes in. So when you're writing and drawing, you get to skip a lot of those steps because you're already at least for me personally, I'm already thinking about them as I'm writing it, because I have a better idea of what is going to happen visually with what I'm writing than if there's that disconnect between the story, the script changing hands from the writer to the artist. So, the other thing is that I can only blame myself if I do something that I painted myself into a corner or something. So there's only one person to get mad at, and that person is me.
I hear you. So, when you create a story like this, like Count or anything else you've ever worked on, what emotional place do you like to work from?
I try to be happy, I guess. It's hard to create anything if you're miserable or in an otherwise, crummy mood. So I try to surround myself with things that bring me joy. I'm a big fan of, I like to make action figures, or rather customize them. So I'll take one in the format that it exists in, and I will alter a bunch of things about it to make it into something else, or to enhance features that it already has. So I've got a fair amount of those in my office that I have placed in different little scenes, and some of them I build dioramas for and stuff. So it's a nice thing to have around as a constant source of inspiration, or just general creative joy around me.
That's
So
amazing.
that's yeah, it's a lot of fun. I needed a hobby that wasn't more drawing, because drawing was my hobby until it became my job, and then so it's hard to have a fun creative outlet when it feels a lot like work. So yeah, it was a nice way to get into something that was still creative, but that I didn't have to do for anyone other than me. So that's been the thing that has both kept me going, and then also just kind of provided me a lot of inspiration.
That is really cool. I don't think I've ever talked to anybody who's made custom action figures. I mean, I know they're out there and people do it, but you're the first person I've ever spoken to on the show who has any expertise there.
Awesome. Yeah, there's a pretty strong community of people doing it. I follow a lot of them on Instagram, and it's a lot of fun. There's a lot of creative people doing a lot of cool stuff, and when you see something that makes you go, "Oh, I never would have thought to do that," but that's perfect. It's a lot of fun.
Nice. So, when you read comics, do you feel like you have a preference for paper over digital?
Yeah, I actually read a lot of digital comics. I it's tough because I do like holding the paper ones in my hand. I mean, honestly, it is my preference to hold a comic physically in my hand versus holding an iPad. They're lighter generally, and they're a little more comfortable on your hands, and you can kind of get into different positions without worrying about dropping a 3-pound slab of glass on your face. But with the pandemic and with just my lack of time, a lot of times, I unfortunately, when you make comics, you have a lot less time to read them. So when the pandemic started, I definitely bought a bunch of trades from various comic shops, because I just wanted to support them as everyone was trying to navigate how we were going to move forward when everything was shutting down and we didn't know what the path was going to look like. So that really reignited my readership of comics in a way that I had been missing, because I just was falling into the trap of working too much and then being too tired, or having too many other obligations to then sit down with a comic. But for single issues, I prefer to read them digitally, because they just pile up so much, and then you're left with these boxes full of things that you read once and you might not read again, and they just take up space. So what I tend to do is I will read digitally for single issues, or stuff that's really hard to get, maybe translations from Europe and things like that. And then with you know stuff that's like from Image, or some of the big two stuff, or Boom, I tend to get the physical trades, so that I can still help support the shops and have a nice collected version of something, and that way I'm not double dipping on you know single issues and the trade. So that way I can have a digital version and then the physical version.
Does the act of creating comics, or the profession of creating comics, change the way that you appreciate comics as a reader or a fan?
Oh, absolutely. I think first and foremost, knowing how hard they are to make really ups my appreciation. And also, I tend to give more leeway to things, I think, that maybe previously would have been like, "Ah, I don't like the way that looks," or, if I was being overly critical, there's a grain of salt now that I that I take things with, knowing the process of putting them together and the deadlines involved, and sometimes there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, etc. Um, and then from an artistic standpoint, I think I really just get lost in imagery in comics a lot because there's nothing more fun to me than reading a comic and trying to figure out how that artist did that, or just sitting back and appreciating, even though I know how they did it, it just works really well. And I think it all kind of goes into your mental vocabulary, and then get to draw on that inspiration as you're drawing. You think of times you saw a thing that inspired you, and oh yeah, so and so found a really cool solution for this type of panel. Let me see how I can elaborate on that. So yeah, I think all in all, it has really upped my appreciation for them.
That's awesome. What's the coolest thing you've ever worked on?
That's a great question. I think, I try not to put too much into IPs that other people or companies own, in terms of my dream is to do this thing that isn't mine,
Sure.
but getting to write and draw James Bond was pretty awesome, because I'm a huge James Bond fan. And before I did James Bond Origin, I got to write and draw a holiday special that was an oversized 30-page one shot of the modern day James Bond series. So it wasn't the prequel kind of stuff that we did with Origin. This was like current James Bond, Ian Fleming's version from the books in modern day. And that was just a real joy to do because I'm such a big fan of the character.
I grew up on Ian Fleming novels, and there's just something about the way they're put together, from start to finish. A lot of it just doesn't translate over to the movies.
Yeah, there's a lot about Bond himself that you don't get in the films, because it talks about his particular sensibilities or his tastes, how he hates or he hates tea, and the food he likes and things like that, that really just elaborate on the character in a way that you don't get from movies.
Let's go back to Count for a second. One of the things that really struck me about the trailer was just how diverse the cast was. How do you approach diversity with your storytelling?
Well, and thank you for noticing, because that was something that, it is important to me. And I guess I really just kind of, I'm very fortunate to have a diverse cast of people in my life. And so for me, it's just the norm. And I feel fortunate that I don't have to remind myself or be reminded to do it. Because my go-to isn't just to draw like a bunch of white dudes or something. It's like for me,
Sure.
it's fun to if I'm drawing a crowd, or a group of people on a street or something, I tend to draw from my own experiences in that way. So I think I've been very fortunate in that way, because a lot of times when you're drawing characters, whether they're main characters or supporting or just background people, for me at least, my mind goes to people that I know, because I think, oh, I can put someone who kind of reminds me of, Alan in here, or maybe this is Sean, or maybe this is Tamara, or whatever. And so I'm kind of pulling from people that I know in real life, which happen to be diverse, and then that translates on the page.
Is it challenging, just going through the process of having your characters find their voices?
Yeah, I think it's easy to kind of make everyone sound the same if you're not careful, or if they're not well enough defined in your head yet. So, being newer to the writing and drawing aspect of creating comics, that's something I definitely have to keep in mind as I go, because I don't want to slip, or not pay close enough attention to that.
Are you the type of writer that sits and plans out everything meticulously, or do you just go with the flow?
I'm not a go with the flow person in general, unfortunately. So I think sitting around and meticulously planning everything is kind of just how I am in general. I take very calculated steps in life with everything I do. I think it's a form of self-preservation, because I've had, a lot of stuff not go great. And so I'm always trying to forecast my steps to mitigate the possible damage. And so when I do the same thing when I'm putting a script or a story together, I try to poke it with as many holes as I can, so that I can make sure it's watertight before I send it off for notes or whatever. So yeah, definitely that method is the way that I work.
What's your favorite comic book or comic book series of all time?
That's an easy one. Scalped by Jason Aaron and R.M. Guerra with various fill-in artists and colorists. It's such a well-made, beautifully drawn, sprawling epic that is it's got this ensemble cast and everyone is interesting, and it takes little detours and then comes back to the main plot, and everything weaves together really well, and I think it's just masterful stuff. And I have all the oversized hardcovers of it that I'm just like dying to get back to and read again. And I'll pick it up every so often and I'll read the first one, and then I get busy again, and then it's been long enough that I got to go back to the beginning again. So I'm I'm still trying to get through it a second time from when I initially read it.
What are you reading now? Other than that, you kind of said you're reading that. I'm sorry. What are you reading?
Oh, I'm not currently reading Scalp as much as I would like to. I know that I don't have the time to get through the whole thing, so I haven't started for fear of doing what I just mentioned, which is like the starting it and then stopping again. I have been reading a bunch of stuff lately. I read a bunch of Ninjak from Valiant, which is a lot of fun.
Good
And
series.
yeah, I read it when they first launched it, when Valiant first did their relaunch, within the last however many years. And as with most reading endeavors, I ended up losing the thread. So I went back and finished what I had started and then read beyond that. That was a ton of fun. I just read Hawkeye Freefall by Matt Rosenberg and Otto Schmidt, and that was one of the most fun comics I've ever read. In fact, I don't think I've ever laughed out loud reading a comic before, but that one had me doing it like consistently with every issue. I read a bunch of volumes of a French series that was translated to English called The Undertaker, and I'm blanking on the writer's name. The artist, I believe, is named Ralph Meyer, and it's this really cool series. It's a Western about this uh, Undertaker who just kind of goes from town to town with his wagon that he keeps his embalming fluids and all his tools and stuff on, and he just kind of services the towns as they need him, but he typically ends up getting embroiled in some kind of drama or hijinks because usually with death comes those sort of things, and it's kind of about those adventures in the old west, and it's really beautifully drawn, so that's been a fun one too.
Who would you say is the most underrated or most inspiring comics creator that you can think of?
Well, I think those are two different answers for me. I think most inspiring, this is probably an answer that a lot of people would give, but Stuart Immonen, as far as art is concerned, is just an absolute master, and everything he does is just a joy to look at. And I think he does work with such beautiful simplicity. Like it's he knows which marks to put down on the page in a way that tells you exactly what that thing is, but he's not overdoing it or overworking it. Like nothing is too extra. And there's I guess what I'm trying to say is there's an economy to his work that is really inspiring, and it's funny because I can look at his stuff and I'm instantly like, man, why am I even bothering? And then I'm also really inspired to try to get better. So as far as underrated, I actually thought about this like yesterday. This thought occurred to me. I thought, this is one of the most underrated people in comics, and now I can't think of it. I think certainly this person is like an artist's artist, but James Herron, I'm really excited for his new Skybound book that's coming out called Ultra Mega, and he is one of the best illustrators in comics today, and outside of comics too. Frankly, he's just incredible, and he's really set a lot of trends, and a lot of people are copying what he does, but no one can quite get to where he's at because he's he's the original voice in that style. And we don't see him on a ton of stuff, and I think it's because he probably does a lot of commissions, and he's been working on this book Ultra Mega for a long time, sort of behind the scenes. But I think he's underrated in the sense that he's not on people's lips and minds enough, but I think we're going to see a change with that with this new series coming out.
That sounds great. I'm not actually familiar with that one.
Oh, well, his new book coming out, it comes out actually the same day Count does, and I think you will it's a perfect jumping on point because he's writing it and drawing it, so it's you're getting a very true vision from him, and it's a kind of Ultraman kaiju kind of book. So it's giant people and monsters fighting in cities, and it just, I mean, from the preview art, it's absolutely gorgeous. And so I'm really excited to see what he does with the story too, because I've never read anything he's written before. So
Nice. That sounds like it's right up my alley too. So
awesome.
it looks like we're heading up against the end of the show. Are you ready for the fun part?
Let's do. Well, if that wasn't the fun part, then I'm in for. Yeah, let's do it.
Awesome. So, what's your favorite food?
Oh, that's a good question. I struggle with this one sometimes because it changes based on the day, but I think Indian food is my favorite.
Good call. So, like lots of curries and spices.
Yeah, I'm also a vegetarian, and they have a lot of meatless dishes, so it's kind of a wonderful coincidence of two things that I enjoy: a lot of curry and no meat.
Nice, nice. I've just actually, I'm sort of in the process of working on becoming a vegetarian myself.
Right on.
I was curious, what were your motivations for being a vegetarian?
So I had given up red meat a couple of years before I gave up all meat, and honestly, a big part of it is I have two dogs that are like the center of my universe. And I saw a video of a dog playing with cows, and it just struck me that they were very similar, just in different packages. And I thought, like, how could I love my dogs and think of myself as an animal lover, but then put other ones on the fire. And I realized, like, oh, because I'm a pet lover, and so if I want to really love animals, then I need to make this larger commitment. And then I watched a documentary that was on Netflix called Game Changer, or the Game Changers, and it was really enlightening. They basically broke down sort of the evolutionary process of we're primates, and we have molars that are for mashing greenery and not necessarily serrated teeth for cutting meat. And they dispelled just a lot of misconceptions that I had, and then they talked about how the cattle industry was such a big thing, and and this around the same way that they did cigarettes in like the 60s and 70s, where you'd have Marlboro billboards everywhere. There was a lot of lobbyists for uh the livestock industry who were really just pushing meat on everyone. And so yeah, it was a combination of a bunch of things. And then also they talked about how you can get they said, well, yeah, a lot of people think you only get protein from eating meat, and they worry about, well, how are you going to get your protein when you become a vegetarian? And they were like, well, where do you think the animals get protein? From the vegetables and the plants. So they're just kind of an inefficient delivery system for that protein, because they carry with it a bunch of different fats and things that are not good for you. So yeah, once I watched that, it kind of just answered any questions I had and sort of tied up the loose ends. And I just was like, all right, I'm done. And I have not eaten meat since. And it's been about a year and a half now. So if you're thinking about it, it's never been a better time, because there are just so many. I mean, you can go to Burger King and get a Whopper and it doesn't have meat in it now. So it's like I haven't even noticed it really in my like I haven't had to make really any special concessions or really dance around it too much, because there are just so many alternatives available to us now. So anyway, that's my soapbox on that. Sorry.
Oh no, you're totally good. I was just going to say that, like, last week I spent like $150 on like artificial meat products in various shapes and sizes, and
Yeah.
I was just amazed at how incredible they are. I mean, like this plant-based chicken that's out now, you can't tell the
Hmm.
difference. You know, it's basically what you expect out of chicken.
Yeah. Yeah, it really is. And it's funny too because after I kind of experienced the sort of shift in my mindset, like I don't even sometimes I don't even want the stuff that's supposed to be like meat because I just meat is so unappealing to me now. I'm just like, I don't know if I even want to feel like I'm having it. But I will say the beyond meat, like imitation burger stuff you can get is pretty it's pretty close. Like I think you could serve it to somebody and they wouldn't know that they weren't eating a burger.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's totally fair, and I think that's really what appeals to it, or what appeals to me about it, because for one thing, I feel better when I'm not eating meat.
Yeah.
I feel healthier, I feel lighter, and I want more of that. I think.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's been a big part of it for me too. Like I tend to, I know it's the cliche thing to say, but I do have more energy, you know, and I just generally feel a little bit more with it, I think, than I used to. Like less sluggish.
Totally, totally. I know exactly what you're talking about. Hey, would you believe like that? My next scripted question was, "Are you a cat or a dog person?"
Well, this is actually a loaded question for me because I used to be more of a cat person. I still love cats, but I was not a dog person. Like I didn't understand it. I was like, why what do they do? I mean, they just you have to when else would you have to walk around carrying poop, a little bag, like a little hobo bindle over your shoulder. Like what are we doing? And then and then when I met my wife, she had a dog and this dog was not into me at all and I was not into her. And so we just kind of like, all right, you do your thing over there, I'll do my thing over here. And eventually we warmed up to each other. And when she was a stray when my wife adopted her, so she was not very trusting of people, especially men. And so it took about a year for her to really get to a point where she was fully comfortable with me and started to kind of look to me to have her needs met. And once that happened, like I just it's like I saw the Matrix and I was just like, oh, I get it. Like they just love and eat and sleep. That's like what they do. And there's some, and I don't remember what any number of atrocities that was happening at the time. And I remember just looking down at her little face and thinking like, you exist independent of all of this. Like you just are a little vessel of affection, and
Aw.
it's just everything. Like so, then we ended up getting a second one, and he was not a starter model, but through a lot of training and hard work, we really got him to a good place. And so now we've got these two wonderful little dogs that just kind of brighten up every day.
I bet. I bet. I have this old cat that sits around my house. She's amazing.
Old
Having
cats are the best.
oh, they're great. Having an animal, just someone to take care of, someone who loves you, is just it's a great feeling.
Yeah, it really is.
What's the best swear word?
Ooh, a well-timed, well-enunciated F word is just like there's nothing like it.
Nice. So you wake up one morning and you're imbued with superpowers. You can do anything you want with them. They are your superpowers. What are they, and what do you choose to do?
Are we talking multiple or just one?
Anything you like.
Well, I mean, this is probably going to be no surprise to anyone who's been listening, but to wake up and have Superman's powers would be amazing because I think number one would be flying. Who doesn't want to do that, right? But then the super strength would be pretty rad too, and I would certainly use it to try to do some good, the way that Superman does. And hopefully, I wouldn't have as many inhibitors on staying neutral as Superman might have, and I would just
Sure.
get in there and get some stuff done.
So in that capacity, do you see yourself as like a hero or an anti-hero or something else?
Oh, definitely a hero. I think some people might agree or disagree with what that means, but I think we see a lot of injustices happening and a lot of people taking advantage of the masses, and I would definitely endeavor to put a stop to that. and get people housed and fed, I mean,
Yeah.
that's the main thing, right? Like, I think there are a lot of ways to do that if somebody had the abilities of Superman, they could just get in and do it, use super speed to clear out some, maybe vacant buildings and reinforce them, with some solid beams and whatnot. And then, hey, we just got 40 units available for people who are living on the street or something like that,
That'd be great. Do you have a costume in mind?
Oh, I mean, that's a good question. No, I think it would have to be something bright and colorful. I think that's the thing with Superman. It's like it's so friendly. You see that, and it's very. There's something about the very basic primary colors, and they're not dark and grimy looking. So you just it feels like you can trust it a little more. So I think it would have to be something along those lines.
That would be great. I could see that too. That would be an amazing superhero. Okay, so 100 years from now, NASA throws your lifetime of creative output into a space capsule and launches it into deep space. Sometime later, aliens find it and consume your body of work. What do they think of it? Do they have a prevailing thought?
They might think that I was really into drawing people in suits. I feel like I've done a lot of that. Or maybe they think I'm really into mountain climbing because of high crimes. Aside from sort of general hiking, I've never climbed a mountain. So they would be misinformed, I guess. But
That's awesome. Well, Ibrahim, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me on my humble little podcast. Where can people find you online?
The best place right now is to go to countcomic.com because that's got the aforementioned trailer. It's got links to various purchase options to the book where, there's a local comic shop locator link on there, or bookshop.com or Barnes & Noble or Amazon. And then it's got links to my personal website and social media accounts there. And on Instagram is where I post the most art and custom action figures and things like that. So if people want to check any of that out that we've talked about, they will find it there. And yeah, thank you for having me, Eva. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate you taking the time to have a conversation with me.
Yeah, this was great. I can't wait to see your custom action figures, by the way.
Oh, thank you. I hope they are not underwhelming.
I'm sure they're great. Hey, it's time to close the show. And that means I need to thank the most beautiful, incredible, amazing person in the universe. And that's you. We couldn't do any of this without your love, support, and ongoing encouragement. Thank you. Titular Characters is produced and hosted by the adorable Eva Webb. That's me, completely. I am adorable, and you should remember that. Sound services by Brogan Malloy. Opening theme by Antonia Marquis. Closing theme by Mikey Flash and Speed Force Music. And that's it, my babies. That's all we got. Join us next time for another exciting adventure in cyberspace. Love yas.